Line is in the call. La ligne est dans l'appel.
Thank you for joining us this morning. Last week, I stood before Canadians and presented a press conference on medical censorship in Canada from many highly qualified individuals who did not have a voice. That video in only 2 days became the most watched video in CPAC's history. Today, it stands at over 500,000 views. I'm here today on a different issue, but in many ways it's the same. We hear only one line of reasoning here in Canada from our public leaders and the media, and it's the politically correct line. We don't hear the other side of the story, and it's not my job as a parliamentarian to sugarcoat things to tell Canadians what the official message is. My job is to be the voice of Canadians. My job is to allow Canadians to tell their stories. It's not my job to tell them what their stories should be. Today, I have various people here who want to speak out on Bill C6, the vote for which will be today. I have been a critic of this bill from the beginning, and I have articulated my concerns. I spoke to this bill yesterday in the House of Commons. I've put out a lengthy blog piece on my MP Derek Sloan website, and today I want to allow people to tell their story in their own words. In closing, I appreciate you joining us to hear from several leading experts to explain why they remain very concerned with Bill C6, the impacts we may now see from it, and potential ways to move forward. I am now pleased to introduce Jose Ruba, Communications Director for Free to Care, a national organization defending counseling choice for Canadians. As someone who freely chose counseling to reduce unwanted sexual behavior, he speaks out to protect fundamental rights for all Canadians. Thank you, and go ahead, Jose.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sloan, for letting us speak today and sharing our story. And we really appreciate the chance to be able to do that. My name is Jose Ruba, the Communications Director for Free to Care. Free to Care was born out of an ad hoc committee of Calgarians who came together to speak out against our draconian conversion therapy bylaw, which is very similar to the law or the criminal law that's being proposed and may be passed today in Parliament. The counseling ban is draconian because it is one of the few jurisdictions in the world that actually bans behavioral counseling independent of counseling, of whether or not that counseling changes someone's orientation. In fact, of the 136 jurisdictions that have banned or in the process of banning conversion therapy, only a few Canadian governments, all of the municipal governments or the province of Quebec, have banned behavioral counseling independent of orientation change. In other words, governments around the world have successfully banned harmful conversion therapy without banning helpful counseling Canadians like myself want. And that's the story we want to be able to share today. So our first two speakers are actually counselors who potentially could be criminalized, could go to jail, their work criminalized simply because of the work that they do. Before I turn to them, though, I want to just introduce my colleague, Ricardo Fortune, to introduce himself en français, just in case there's any questions en français. Go ahead, Ricardo.
Alors bonjour, mon nom c'est Ricardo Fortuné. Alors comme mentionné par José Rouba, je suis son collègue auprès de Free to Care. Notre nom en français c'est Aider sans contrainte et je sers de délégué auprès de la francophonie. Mon rôle est principalement de sensibiliser les francophones à cet enjeu qui est très important et je vais être là pour répondre à vos questions si toutefois il y en aurait plus tard.
Merci beaucoup, Ricardo. Our first speaker is Dr. Anne Gillies of Restoring the Mosaic. She is a trained psychotherapist from Ontario with a primary therapeutic focus on survivors of complex trauma. She is passionate about helping LGBTQI Canadians as members of her own family have personally been impacted by questions of gender and sexual identity. Dr. Anne, over to you.
Hi, my name is Dr. Anne Gillies. I'm a professionally trained Canadian psychotherapist, and I want counselors to be able to help their clients. The government will throw people like me in jail if Bill C6 becomes law. Bill C6, as it presently stands, clearly and significantly discriminates against Canadians on the basis of sexual orientation, and it defines conversion therapy as any practice, treatment, or service to reduce or repress non-heterosexual attraction or sexual behavior or non-cisgender gender expression. Counseling to simply reduce unwanted sexual behavior is going to be criminalized, and this means LGBTQ Canadians would be prevented support. Many Canadians are presently able to seek and receive therapeutic assistance with the alleviation of numerous sex-related concerns, including intrusive sexual thoughts and fantasies, such as undesired sexual thought patterns intruding in the classroom, workplace, or family gatherings. They can receive assistance to reduce casual sex with many partners, assistance to reduce use of pornographic materials, assistance to reduce sexual addictions, and assistance with the ability to remain faithful to a sexual partner. Canadians seek this therapeutic assistance because they reasonably believe these thoughts are creating harm in their lives. If Bill C6 passes, these supports will only be available for non-LGBTQ people. The bill allows for what the government calls an exception, giving clients the ability to explore their sexuality and gender. This is not an exception because it prevents clients from favoring a particular sexual direction. This provides no actual protection. When the client comes to me to modify their behavior, that modification will be toward one sexual identity or gender identity. A client who wants to reduce her same-sex pornography use may want to reduce that behavior because she wants to save her heterosexual marriage. C6 means I could only help her reduce that behavior if it was straight porn. Canadians' access to therapeutic support should never be cut off on the basis of their sexual identity. Undesired, uncontrolled, harmful sexual thoughts, feelings, attractions, and behaviors do not conveniently wait for the age of majority to manifest in the minds and lives of young people. In 2014, Adam, a 16-year-old, formed a group for teenagers who found themselves feeling sexually attracted to children. These young men came together to prevent themselves from offending and using child porn. Bill C6 will criminalize such groups. Therapists need to be free to treat any client without the government dictating who receives help. The definition must be changed. This must stop. Consensual, non-coercive practices, treatment services to repress or reduce non-heterosexual attraction or sexual behavior should never be forbidden. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ann. We also have Dr. Laura, who is also a trained, a licensed psychologist, is on the board of the International Federation for Therapeutic and Counseling Choice. Dr. Laura, go ahead. Dr. Laura, we can't hear you, or you might be muted.
Bill that criminalizes helping anyone to decrease same-sex behavior, and as such, it will send some gay-affirming therapists to prison. Gay-affirming researchers have proven that men who have sex with men can successfully decrease same-sex behavior through standard therapies conducted by gay-affirming therapists and retain this change over time in order to decrease risk of HIV transmission. Men who were fathers and men for whom same-sex behavior was not consistent with their values were especially successful at decreasing same-sex behavior. These men may want to save their opposite-sex marriages in which they have children or to practice their orthodox religion. More research has found that religious same-sex attracted men who were married to women, nearly all of whom had children, on average 3 children each, successfully decreased both same-sex attraction and behavior. The number of these men who engaged in same-sex behavior before therapy was 71% and 14% after therapy. What this means to these men, their wives, and their children can hardly be expressed. For these men, depression and suicidal thoughts and attempts significantly decreased. Contrary to conventional wisdom, robust research has established internationally that most people who are same-sex attracted are both sex attracted, and most both sex attracted people who are in a relationship are with the opposite sex. 91% of Canadians agree they should have the right to therapeutic help to decrease same-sex behavior and attraction as needed to keep their marriage and family safe. Everyone should have the right to walk away from sexual or gender practices or experiences that don't work for them and have support to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Laura. Now we have Colette Ikema. Colette Ikema is a mom of 3 in the Lethbridge area. Go ahead, Colette.
Thank you so much. My name is Colette, and I wish that our government would only ban conversion therapy today, but I do not believe that will happen. In fact, I don't wish to limit the rights of LGBTQ Canadians, and I do not support conversion therapy. In fact, I hope our government today will ban torture and abuse against LGBT, but instead they will likely also criminalize therapy that I needed and asked for. When I was a teenager, I was gang raped and I became addicted to hardcore pornography. The gay and bisexual escalated, or I struggled, and my sexuality became a source of distress for me, became suicidal. Until I found help, and a counselor at the University of Cambridge. This therapy, just because it reduced my non-heterosexual attractions and behaviors, is defined as conversion therapy in Bill C-6. If this conversion therapy ban, if Bill C-6 had been in place while I was going through recovery, I don't know if I would have recovered the way that I did. In fact, if it weren't for that support group and for that secular counselor, I'm not sure I would even be alive to speak to you today. And I despair of the day that I need this care again, and I will be unable to find it because Bill C-6 has criminalized it. Now, our government has told me I have nothing to worry about because their exemption allows for exploratory and legitimate conversations. But by refusing to see the need that I had for behavioral therapy as legitimate, they themselves have rejected my lived experience and victimized me again. My interest in therapy was not to explore my sexually distressing feelings. I knew where they came from. Instead, I needed to have help reducing my non-heterosexual. Despite telling her to create a new definition in Bill C-6 that restricts my access to care as a trauma victim, they have defined conversion therapy as not just forced orientation change, but also behavior change. No other jurisdiction or professional body in the world has done this. Today, I ask you, please, listen to my story. We need your help, ensuring that our government knows that there are many legitimate reasons someone may want to reduce their non-heterosexual attractions or behaviors, and I hope we can all agree that none of those are for the government to decide nor to dismiss. We need to have the freedom to adopt labels and reject them. Thank you.
Thank you, Colette. Jeremy Williamson was born with a visual apparent intersex defect and is concerned about how C6 will affect the medical professionals that treat him and others like him. Jeremy, go ahead.
Thank you, Jojo. I was born with a genetic defect that affected the outward development of my genitalia. This defect is one in a category with many variations that is known as intersex. Intersex defects, depending on the severity of the forming mutation, can have severe and lifelong health complications. In my case, I have had life-threatening low levels of testosterone, digestive complications, poor development, weak bones, and it is believed that it contributed to the loss of 3 of my children to miscarriage. These are not health items that can or should be ignored. If not treated correctly or timely, they can be terminal, and in many unfortunate cases, they are. It astounds me that ignorant and uneducated politicians think that it is their right to prevent sound medical and scientific knowledge and force parents and professionals to choose between their freedom and an honest and proper diagnosis of my condition. If gender is a social construct and can be changed at will, then this would be fine. But since it is not, and a wrong gender diagnosis can and does kill or maim intersex people, any harm that C6 causes will be on the hands of those politicians that vote yes today. Today, if passed, a parent will no longer be able to trust their doctor to give them the gender of their child because that doctor could face 5 years in prison for deciding what that gender is. Today, if passed, a parent could face a minimum of 3 years in prison and have their child kidnapped by the state because they sought out medical treatments for their own flesh and blood in a part of the world where reason and sanity had not been replaced with witch hunts. Today, if passed, intersex people will be more at risk than ever before because politicians with no understanding of what they are talking about decided for all intersex people that they are not allowed to determine for themselves what counseling or for their specific cases they are allowed to receive, what behaviors they are allowed to have, and what medical treatments are appropriate for them. God save intersex people from LGBTQ2+ sycophants in government who dropped the I as soon as they were done using us.
Thank you, Jeremy. Appreciate your comments. We have Renee is next. Renee received counseling support as a minor under the age of sexual consent. Under Bill C-6, the support she received would be criminalized. Renee, go ahead.
Good morning. My name is Renee. Today I'm married to an amazing man and a mother to one son and one daughter who was due several days ago. But my life hasn't always looked like this. You see, as a minor under the age of sexual consent, I engaged in sexual activity with another girl. I hated myself and I hated being born female, and I desperately needed someone to talk to. Eventually, I decided that I really needed to talk through and process these experiences and my emotions with someone. I was afraid to talk to my parents, but they loved me and accepted me and found a counselor to talk with me. The counseling was not harmful, coercive, or abusive in any way. I simply poured out my heart to the counselor about what I had done, how I felt about myself, and how I wanted to move forward. The counseling I received that day spoke identity and confidence into me in a way that completely changed my life. I now have utter joy and satisfaction in life that is so incredibly fulfilling. And I am so happy with the decision I made to get counseling and to receive the grace of Jesus to live how I am. You may think that I'm repressing my true sexual identity, but actually for me, I couldn't be happier. Here's the problem with this bill. It prohibits exactly what I wanted and received. The counselor supported my choice to not engage in non-heterosexual sexual behavior. We've heard consistently in debate that Bill C-6 would not ban conversations, but in fact, that is wrong. It would. It would ban the private and confidential conversations between me and my counselor. This bill would even prevent me from knowing if the support I wanted even exists. If Bill C-6 was the law back then, my parents and my counselor could have been sent to jail for 5 years. The government claims helpful counseling will not be banned because of this vague exemption clause in the definition of conversion therapy. However, counseling is only exempted if it's provided without favoring any particular sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression. But I was looking for a counselor who favored a particular gender identity and sexual orientation that matched what I wanted for myself and consistent with my beliefs. This counseling was my choice, the kind of choice this government is taking away. Canadians, including youth, should have the dignity of choosing their support without government interference. Thank you for listening, and please vote no.
Thank you, Renee. Our second last speaker is Emmanuel Sanchez. For his unwanted same-sex attractions also when he was a minor, and the counseling he received didn't change all his attractions, but he says it's helped him reduce behavior he no longer wanted to engage, and he also spoke at the Justice Committee as well on this issue. Go ahead, Emmanuel.
Good morning. My name is Emmanuel. I was around 5 years old the first time I noticed I was attracted to the same sex. I endured a lot of bullying in school at the hands of other boys and began questioning my sexual orientation and gender identity. At the age of 12 years old, I severely hated myself and became very suicidal. When I turned 16, I decided to identify as gay. I began to engage in same-sex relationships and visit gay bars in efforts to fully accept myself and embrace this new identity. As a 16-year-old, I realized that even though I was doing everything that society said would make me happy, I was still very unsettled. So on my own initiative, I chose to regularly meet with a counselor. She affirmed my sexual identity and encouraged me to continue living the life that I was living. However, I still felt very unsettled. Seeing as I was not getting the support I needed, I sought out counseling, this time from a pastor at a church. He was incredibly compassionate and caring, and neither affirmed nor condemned the decisions that I was making or my sexual identity. In fact, we didn't even address those points at first. Instead, we began to tackle the difficulties I had walked through as a child. Each week I met with him, I was able to identify the lies I was believing about myself, and I began to experience truth that restored my heart. Depression, anxiety, fear, and suicidal thoughts began to lift off of me. I started to see life differently and deeply loved it. Joy began to swell within me, and I began to see myself for who Jesus truly created me to be. As a result, I decided I no longer wanted to continue the course my life was on. I ceased to engage in same-sex relationships, and I'm so thankful to have received the guidance and support I freely sought out as a teenager. Had it not been for that, I would not be breathing today and sharing this story with you. As Jose said, the counseling I've received has not removed all my same-sex attractions. However, I have such deep joy and peace living in accordance with my convictions and my beliefs. So In conclusion, I'm asking that MPs acknowledge that people like me all over Canada exist. We stand with their efforts to see LGBTQ plus individuals protected and loved, but we also want them to say no to a poorly written bill. Instead, we ask that they support and respect individuals' freedom at any age to choose the type of support they want and their desired end goal. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Manuel. That is our last speaker. So we have a few minutes left for questions, and I'll then ask Mr. Sloan to conclude us.
Yeah, sure. So what I'd like to ask, if at all possible, can Colette very briefly go over a bit of her story? It did not come through on our end here, just what happened to her as a teenager. Jose, if that's okay with you, I think her story is very powerful. Okay, do we have anybody on the line for questions?
Yeah, thank you so much for...
Okay.
Thank you so much for asking. You know, when I was a teenager, I was gang raped by men in my community, and I became addicted to hardcore pornography as a result. And in the years that followed, I struggled very much with my sexuality. The gay and bisexual feelings that I had always had escalated and became a source of distress for me. And I needed help navigating those and managing them, not exploring them. I needed help reducing them. And I also needed help figuring out my gender identity because of the trauma. I struggled to know who I was, whether I was a boy or a girl, if I was wanted or valued. And so that was what happened to me, and why I needed my 12-step support group, and why I needed my secular counselor to give me that life-saving help.
Go to questions.
And we'll see if we have any questions on the phone. Operator?
Thank you. Merci. We'll now take questions from the telephone lines. Allons maintenant passer à la période de questions. If you have a question, please press *1 on your device's keypad. There will be a brief pause while the participants register. Vous allez poser une question, veuillez appuyer sur les touches étoile 1 de votre appareil. Il y aura un court moment d'attente pour que les gens puissent faire étoile 1. The first question is from Andrew Lawton, True North. Please go ahead. Your line is open.
Good afternoon. In May of 2020, the UN Human Rights Office of the High Commissioner had put out a report in which conversion therapy was defined on terms that were not behaviors, but
We've lost Andrew. Can we see if we can get him back?
Yes, Mr. Lawton, please press *1 again. Please go ahead, Mr. Lawton. Your line is open.
Thank you. I don't know where I dropped off, so I'll start from the beginning. The UN Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights put out a report last year that defined conversion therapy as interventions holding the belief that a person's orientation or identity can and should be changed. It doesn't go as far as to address behavior, which is, as I understand, a key distinction of Bill C-6. And I guess I wanted to ask whoever is best suited to answer this question, is the issue that it extends to behavior, and if that were gone, this bill would be adequately limited to just conversion therapy that most people can agree is wrong, or is there another distinction that you would suggest is required to make C6 palatable?
I can respond to the UN part, if I may. There is no statement in any UN binding treaty about sexual orientation or gender identity. An independent individual, simply submitted a report to the Human Rights Council that has been rejected by many states, dozens of states at least. Islamic, Asian, African states reject his mandate and his report.
Absolutely right, Andrew. The conversion therapy definition, even in that UN report, as well as those used by the United Church of Canada, even LGBTQ activists and organizations themselves, define conversion therapy as orientation change. When they do mention behavior, like the Canadian Psychological Association mentions behavior, it's in the context of orientation change, not independent of it. Because Bill C-6 actually defines conversion therapy as a change in orientation or a reduction or repression of non-heterosexual behavior. It actually bans counseling to reduce behavior. So there's still problems with the bill apart from that, but this bill makes it so much more draconian and so far different from any conversion therapy ban that has passed anywhere in the world except in Canada.
Follow up?
Yeah, so I guess on that note, is your belief that if someone were to seek therapy, someone who had same-sex attraction, someone who had perhaps unsafe sexual practices, if they were to want to address just those practices that they thought were unsafe while not doing anything to change their orientation, would that therapy be banned in your view of the current reading of C6?
Well, again, the wording is very clear. Conversion therapy is defined as both orientation change or reduction of sexual, non-heterosexual behavior. In fact, many U.S. states and cities specifically have what's called a criminal exemption, so that anyone who is dealing with criminal sexual behavior would not have been affected by their conversion therapy ban. You can find that on our Free to Care website. In fact, the vast majority of states and cities in the U.S. that have passed conversion therapy bans explicitly say this does not affect behavioral counseling. Canada's bill, unlike any of these bills, goes the exact opposite.
And I'll check if we have one more question on the phone. Operator?
Thank you. Merci. Next question is from Wilma Van Beek from God Gives Us Bridge Builders.
I'm sorry.
Please go ahead. Your line is open.
I'm sorry. The questions are from members of the press gallery only. We cannot.
So we have Stephanie Levitt from the Toronto Star. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for taking the question. My question, I think, is for Mr. Ruba. Mr. Ruba, I understand that you were working with the Federal Conservative Caucus and members of them to try and help them along with their strategy of how best to communicate their opposition to C6. I wonder your assessment on how that went, given how politicized this bill has become. It's being used as something of a cudgel by the Liberals. And I wonder if you could just speak to that and whether there might have been a way to some kind of unanimity on this, or if that was never going to happen.
Well, the problem, you're absolutely right, is it's become politicized. But I will tell you, we have been working and speaking to members of all the parties who've been willing to meet with us, including Liberal government members. And I can honestly tell you, we've been shocked about how little they actually know about what this bill does and says. When I mentioned to them, and this is to Liberal MPs, that the definition they're using is not used by any medical professional body in Canada, they don't know this. And it's very clear, and I said this to any MP, regardless of what party that came to us, that we can support a conversion therapy ban, but it does not have to be this ban. Like I said, there's 136 governments around the world, and I looked up all of their definitions that have passed conversion therapy bans, and none of them use this definition except for the handful of municipal governments in the province of Quebec. That's because it's not used by any medical body. And when we presented that to Liberal MPs, to NDP MPs, it was obvious that they did not know this fact. So we were willing to help anybody who came to us wanting to this kind of information.
And again, just as a follow-up, when you say, you would support a ban, as some of the other panelists do, just it needs to be written differently. Are you doing any work with any of the other parties to draft another proposed law that could, say, be part of an election platform?
Well, again, we're not partisan as an organization, and we have never been. Any MP who's come to us to ask for help, we're willing to help. In terms of actually working with specific MPs about drafting or being part of a partisan party platform, no, we're not doing that. No one's asked us to do that.
This is all the time we have. Thank you. This concludes the press conference. C'est mes fins de conférence de presse. Merci.
Thank you. Merci. The conference is now.
Thanks so much, everybody.